You're listening to Clarity on Fire, a podcast for people who know what they don't want out of their life and career, but aren't sure what they'd rather be doing.
In a world where it's easy to exist, but hard to feel alive, we, Kristen
and Rachel,
two certified life and career coaches, are here to help you cut through the information overload, get unstuck, and focus not just on how you can have a career you're passionate about, but how to create a whole life that feels fulfilling.
So join us here, where we serve up inspiration and down-to-earth wisdom in a way that only two best friends can.
We want you to experience the relief of knowing that, yes, you're allowed to want more out of your life and career.
And no, you don't have to wander through the dark anymore. Our job is to light the fire that shows you the way. Let's go.
Hey.
Greetings.
You get another special episode on a Tuesday.
Look at you. Well, enjoy it while it lasts, because this is it. Not getting one next Tuesday.
It's not going to be a regular thing.
But we read this book, and I feared that we would have so much to say about it that I couldn't fit it into one episode cleanly. So why try?
Tends to be true about our book club episodes. I feel like there's just so much to share about a book.
This book isn't even that long. It's like 200 pages.
It's really not. But still, there's always a lot to get into. So we're breaking it up for you, making it a little bit more, we're chunking it down.
So before we get into Burnout, I just want to remind you, and we'll circle back to this at the end of this episode, that you have a few more days of our coaching enrollment period left. So if you would like to chat with us about the possibility of working with us one-on-one, you have until Friday to submit a form.
And if you're feeling a little burnt out, which we're going to be getting into in this book, that might be a good cue that some changes need to be made internally or with your situation or both. And that's something we absolutely spend a lot of time on in coaching. So we'll jump into the book, but be thinking about that in the back of your mind. If you're like, ooh, this is relating a little bit too closely, that might just be a sign that it's time for some help. It's time to ask for help.
Burnout is probably the number one problem I see in people I work with.
Oh, yeah.
So
it's pervasive.
So clarityonfire.com/coaching. And if you want to talk to us, you got a few days left. Okay. So where to begin? How about at the beginning? All right. Burnout, The Secret to Unlocking the Stress Cycle by Emily and Amelia Nagoski. They are twin sisters. Fun fact.
First book we have done a podcast about, written by twins. Maybe the first book I've read by twins. Think about that. I've read a lot of books.
I've read a book written by twins, but it's as if Rachel wrote. It's like a Rachel thing, right?
But one is really, really science minded, and one is more drama. They're like
that's not a very
Rachel thing.
Neither of us have science.
That's what I mean. We don't have science.
Okay. So we have our books in front of us. You can hear. You want sound effect? That's me turning pages. So bear in mind, you're going to hear us rifling through. By the way, I recently heard someone in an audiobook pronounce it riffling.
Oh, that sounds British.
It does, British? But it wasn't a British performer on the audiobook. So I was like, have I been saying it wrong my whole life? Because I've literally never until that day heard anyone say riffling. So, I don't like being wrong about words.
I think that person was wrong. I don't think riffling.
I don't think that the publishers of Sarah J. Maas's very widespread fantasy series would let someone just say a word wrong.
Maybe there are multiple acceptable pronunciations.
Well,
there are words like that.
I'm just letting you know that happened. Okay.
I don't know how I feel about that.
Well, we're going to rifle or riffle, tomato,
there you go,
through this book. And we'll quote it a little bit. And we're going to split it in, not in half, but I'm going to break at the point where I think makes most sense to cut off. And then we'll come back on Friday with the latter half of this book.
And there is a pretty big distinction that happens partway through. So it's a natural breakpoint.
Okay, go ahead. Let's introduce them to Burnout.
The problem is not that we aren't trying. The problem isn't even that we don't know how. The problem is the world has turned wellness into yet another goal everyone should strive for, but only people with time and money and nannies and yachts and Oprah's phone number can actually achieve. So this book is different from anything else you'll read about burnout. We'll figure out what wellness can look like in your actual real life, and we'll confront the barriers that stand between you and your own well-being. We'll put those barriers in context, like landmarks on a map, so we can find paths around and over and through them, or sometimes just blow them to smithereens with science. There's a lot of science in this book.
Emily is a health educator who has a PhD, and she's the author of a New York Times bestseller you might have heard of, which is Come As You Are, the surprising new science that will transform your sex life.
And her twin sister, not very science-minded at all. They have a very good complement going on. Her name is Amelia, and she's a choral director who, by virtue of her training as a musician, she learned how to feel her feelings. Well, at least on stage.
There's a 3-part list where they define what burnout is. So I think that would be helpful to read so that we know what we're talking about when we use the word burnout. Okay. Mm-hmm. So number 1, emotional exhaustion, the fatigue that comes from caring too much for too long. 2, depersonalization, the depletion of empathy, caring, and compassion. And 3, decreased sense of accomplishment, an unconquerable sense of futility, feeling that nothing you do makes any difference. Mm. I've experienced all of those at some point in my life.
That's a recipe for burnout. That is for sure.
I think any one of those can cause burnout, but then if you have 2 or 3 at once,
they pile on.
Yeah.
And then they also get into what is an emotion in the first place.
Right. Can we talk about that? Because emotional exhaustion, what is an emotion and how do we exhaust it is a good question.
Here's what they have to say about that.
Okay.
Left to their own devices, emotions, these instantaneous whole body reactions to some stimulus, will end on their own. Your attention shifts from your crush to some other topic, and then the flood of infatuation eases until that certain special someone crosses your mind or your path once more. The same goes for the jolt of pain you feel when someone is cruel to you, or the flash of disgust when you smell something unpleasant. They just end. In short, emotions are tunnels. If you go all the way through them, you get to the light at the end. Exhaustion happens when we get stuck in an emotion. We don't let ourselves go all the way through that tunnel. We get stuck in it. You can exhaust the emotion and thus exhaust yourself.
Yeah.
Cue burnout.
Yeah. So the first part of this book is very heavily about how to go through the tunnel completely. And we'll talk about that in a second. But so integral to this entire book is what I'm about to tell you next. Like, you can't read this book and escape this concept. And so even though Kristen and I don't spend a ton of time calling back to it in the notes that we took about it,
they are constantly
constantly talking about this. And it's absolutely worth saying. And I don't think I can say it briefly. So I'm just going to quote it, and it's going to be maybe a little bit long, but you'll get the idea after I've done it. Okay. So their contention is that the real disease is not burnout. It's what's underneath the burnout. It's the kind of silent, insidious thing that's driving women in particular to burnout. Now, this book, side note, this book obviously is targeted toward women.
And I have to say, after having read it, a lot of this applies to humans. So we're not going to focus exclusively on women here. I think a lot of what they talk about, if you live in the world and experience stress and burnout, you will benefit from this.
Yes. I think women suffer more, and there's no doubt about that. But to think that everyone isn't suffering is a fallacy. And they talk about that. They acknowledge everybody suffers. Yep. Just women get a little bit of the short end of the stick. And here's why. I'm going to read to you what they call human giver syndrome. Okay. In Down Girl, The Logic of Misogyny, philosopher Kate Manne, by the way, I've almost never heard a female philosopher quoted in my life.
That is very cool to hear that.
Well, like, they're just like, they hardly exist. Like, every time you hear a philosopher, it's a fucking man. So thank God there's at least one who's a woman. Okay. Kate Manne describes a system in which one class of people, the human givers, are expected to offer their time, attention, affection, and bodies willingly, placidly to the other class of people, the human beings. The implication in these terms is that the human beings have a moral obligation to be or express their humanity, while human givers have a moral obligation to give their humanity to the human beings. Guess which one women are? In day-to-day life, the dynamic is more complicated and subtle, but let's imagine the cartoon version. The human givers are the attentive, loving subordinates to the human beings. The giver's role is to give their whole humanity to the beings so that the beings can be their full humanity. Givers are expected to abdicate any resource or power they may happen to acquire. Their jobs, their love, their bodies, those belong to the beings. Human givers must, at all times, be pretty, happy, calm, generous, and attentive to the needs of others, which means they must never be ugly, angry, upset, ambitious, or attentive to their own needs. Givers are not supposed to need anything. If they dare to ask for, or God forbid, demand anything, that's a violation of their role as a giver, and they may be punished. And if a giver doesn't obediently and sweetly hand over whatever a being wants, for that too, the giver may be punished, shamed, or even destroyed. If we had set out to design a system to induce burnout in half the population, we could not have constructed anything more efficient. Mm-hmm. And like, we're going to deny that's true. There is truth in that. Every woman, every people pleaser can attest that this is true.
Yes. Human giver syndrome is their way of describing what we have talked about many, many times on the podcast, which is people pleasing.
Yeah.
Where you take on the responsibility of making sure everyone around you is fine, and everyone around you gets the benefit of all of your love and attention and happiness and nurturing. And it's exhausting. Of course, that would lead to burnout.
I have to keep reading because they really put a fine point on it. Okay. Emotional exhaustion happens when we get stuck in an emotion and can't move through the tunnel. In human giver syndrome, the giver isn't allowed to inconvenience anyone with anything so messy as emotion. So givers are trapped in a situation where they're not free to move through the tunnel. They might even be punished for it. I can attest to that. I'm thinking about childhood right now. Your body, with its instinct for self-preservation, knows on some level that human giver syndrome is slowly killing you. That's why you keep trying mindfulness and green smoothies and self-care trend after self-care trend. But that instinct for self-preservation is battling a syndrome that insists that self-preservation is selfish. So your efforts to care for yourself might actually make things worse, activating even more punishment from the world or from yourself, because how dare you? Human giver syndrome is our disease. The book you're reading is our prescription.
Mm-hmm. And it's funny because I do feel like human givers and or people pleasers are more likely to worry that they are selfish than people who don't struggle with that, which is so counterintuitive. It's like you've gotten so conditioned to give and take care of everyone else that the thought of maybe I need to take care of myself because I'm starting to get burnt out makes you feel selfish. The only reason you're feeling selfish is because of how much you have given, but it's an insidious mindset, and it's an insidious set of beliefs that we have taken on from those around us and from society and from our parents and all of it.
We will talk about more of where it originates when we get to the second half on Friday. They talk about, well, let's pause and talk about how this book is organized. I think that they use it because Emily is a teacher. You can tell because she uses stories as well. But Emily is the teacher in this writing duo. And they, instead of giving you example after random example, they do something very smart, which is they take two women who they say are composites of a lot of women they actually have met and know. One is Julie, who's an overwhelmed public school teacher whose body will revolt against her, forcing her to pay attention to it. And Sophie, an engineer who will decide she is not here for the patriarchy, as ways to illustrate what they're teaching is they'll keep coming back to Sophie's story and Julie's story, which I think was helpful because there's like an arc to each of them going through this process that you get to kind of see two women with very different situations handling their burnout differently.
Yep. And you will absolutely relate to at least aspects of one or maybe both throughout,
right,
because they have based these characters on real stories and real people.
Yeah.
So it does make it a little bit more interesting. You're checking in with them all throughout the whole story.
So this book is broken down into 3 major parts: part 1, part 2, part 3. And I have to shout out that I thought they did a great naming the parts, a great job at naming the parts, because they were all heavily pop culture influenced. And, I'm happy about that. So part 1 is what you take with you, which is a Star Wars thing. Like Yoda tells Luke when he's going into this cave, which is it's a very like Joseph Campbell kind of moment. Like, what will I see or face in there? And Yoda says, only what you take with you.
Mm-hmm. There's a lot of Star Trek references.
A lot of Star Trek, yeah. And then part 2 is the real enemy, which is a Hunger Games thing where Haymitch tells Katniss, remember when you're in there who the real enemy is, which is not the other kids.
Right.
It's the system that put you here in the first place. And then part 3 is wax on, wax off. Need we say that's a Karate Kid reference about winning? So
I have a lot of pop culture references all the way through. A lot of Disney references, a lot of very modern shows.
It's relatable.
Yeah, they try to make it relatable.
Okay.
So one of the first things that I'm really glad they differentiated these, because I think we often conflate them as the same thing and they need to be treated differently. So they talk about the difference between the stressor and then the stress that you feel.
I think we just typically blanket call everything stress, but it's helpful to know the difference between what's stress and what's a stressor. Like, what's the thing that's causing it? And then what's actually the stress.
Yep. So we're going to quote their description of each just so we know exactly where they both fall.
Okay.
Stressors are what activate the stress response in your body. They can be anything that you hear, see, smell, touch, taste, or imagine could do you harm. There are external stressors, could be work, family, money, time, cultural norms and expectations, experiences of discrimination, and so on. And there are less tangible internal stressors: self-criticism, body image, identity, memories, and the future, which they capitalize because we know we all stress about the future.
God, constantly.
In different ways and to different degrees, all of these things may be interrupted by your body or interpreted by your body as potential threats.
Yes.
So stressor is a potential threat.
Yes.
Coming from internal or external
circumstances.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. I'm going to read about stress, and this is going to be long, but it's so important and it's so helpful to understand this fully that you need to hear all of it. Like, very rarely throughout this book am I going to quote like anything in detail, but this is the thing to understand about burnout. Okay. Stress is the neurological and physiological shift that happens in your body when you encounter one of these threats. It's an evolutionarily adaptive response that helps us cope with things like, say, being chased by a lion or charged by a hippo. When your brain notices the lion or hippo, it activates a generic stress response, a cascade of neurological and hormonal activity that initiates physiological changes to help you survive. Epinephrine acts instantly to push blood into your muscles. All right, watch out, you guys. I'm about to try to say glucocorticoids keep you going, and endorphins help you ignore how uncomfortable all of this is. Your heart beats faster, so your blood pumps harder, so your blood pressure increases, and you breathe more quickly. Your muscles tense, your sensitivity to pain diminishes, your attention is alert and vigilant, focusing on short-term, here and now thinking. Your senses are heightened. Your memory shifts to channel its functioning to the narrow band of experience and knowledge most immediately relevant to this stressor. Plus, to maximize your body's efficiency in this state, your other organ systems get deprioritized. Your digestion slows down and your immune functioning shifts. Ditto growth and tissue repair, as well as reproductive functioning. Your entire body and mind change in response to the perceived threat. And so, here comes the lion. You are flooded with stress response. What do? You run. You see, this complex multi-system response has one primary goal: to move oxygen and fuel into your muscles in anticipation of the need to escape. Any process not relevant to that task is postponed. As Robert Sapolsky puts it, for us vertebrates, the core of the stress response is built around the fact that your muscles are going to work like crazy. So you run. And then there are only two possible outcomes. Either you get eaten by the lion or trampled by the hippo. In either case, none of the rest of this matters. Or you escape, you survive. You run back to your village, the lion chasing you all the while, and you shout for help. Everyone comes out and helps you slaughter the lion. You're saved, yay. You love your friends and family. You're grateful to be alive. The sun shines, or the sun seems to shine more brightly as you relax into the certain knowledge that your body is a safe place to be. Together, the village cooks a lot of the lion and shares a communal feast, and then you all bury the parts you can't use in an honoring ceremony. Hand in hand with the people you love, you take a deep, relaxing breath and give thanks to the lion for its sacrifice. Stress response cycle complete, and we all live happily ever after. This is the whole point, is that we are never completing the stress cycle. Like, that right there was the illustration of, from beginning to end, how the stress cycle works. And we almost never complete it, is kind of the footnotes summary of this book.
If you take one thing from this book, the thing that I took from this that was really novel, that I hadn't heard anywhere else, was we have stressors, things that cause stress. We usually think we need to deal with the stressor, and sometimes you do have to deal with the stressor, but we're not addressing our physiological stress response to the stressor, which needs its own different attention.
Your body doesn't know that it's not being chased by a lion. Like, we have not evolved to the point where we don't understand that someone being mean to us on the internet is not a threat, or that our boss saying something passive aggressive is not a real threat. And so we're constantly having that reaction, and we are not doing what adaptively we would have done when we got stressed.
We're not completing that cycle.
Right.
And the really important thing here is that your body needs some signals that we can complete the stress response. You can't just tell your mind, we're safe now, it's fine.
You can't logic your way into your body understanding that it's safe.
They give a good example of what would happen if a bigger animal, or I don't even know what that would be, came in.
A dinosaur, a Tyrannosaurus Rex.
Came and snatched up the lion while it was chasing you and then ran off. Do you think your body is just like, oh, we're fine now?
No, you're sitting there freaking out, about to like literally expire because your heart is going so hard.
Yeah, just because the stressor goes away doesn't mean your body instantaneously goes back to neutral. You still have to complete the cycle. So most of the time, that's what's happening, is we're just constantly getting stressed and we're not completing the cycle. And it's no wonder eventually we reach burnout.
So we get stuck and unable to actually complete the cycle for three main reasons. One, chronic stress from stressors that literally never go away because the stress is outpacing our capacity to handle it. I mean, everyday life, do you mean? Having a job, do you mean? The state of the world and the news, do you mean?
Yeah, there's too many.
It's too many things, and we just can't do it fast enough.
Also, social appropriateness. Like, sometimes you can't just be on the metro or on the subway and somebody says a rude comment and you just
do 10 jumping jacks or run around up and down like a crazy person.
Right. Or you're in a meeting and somebody says a snippy comment and you sorry, I got to complete the stress cycle right now in the middle of this meeting. Well, you have to just kind of be appropriate in that setting. And to some degree that's annoying, but to some degree that's living with other humans.
Well, and the underlying, I mean, what I'm sure they said when they actually wrote that section in the book is that has everything to do with human giver syndrome. The appropriateness has to do with, we're often encouraged to suppress our feelings and to not, show that we're having any sort of reaction to something.
Absolutely. And they did talk about that. And they did talk about the fact that sometimes it's okay when you're living with other humans to not
immediately process your stress in front of them.
Right. Yeah. So sometimes it's being polite and sometimes it's being a little bit over polite and over accommodating.
Well, you can be by yourself and still feel, because you've been conditioned to not express emotions, that you can't have them even when you're by yourself and no one would see you processing, right?
Exactly.
And of course, the third reason that we sometimes get stuck is because it's not safe in that moment for us to do it. Like they give an example of catcalling. Well, you could punch, fight or flight, right? You could cross the street and punch that motherfucker in the face. That's not going to end up being a safer choice, you know? So these things build up, and over time it leads to all sorts of, not just burnout, chronic ailments, mental health, failings. I mean, failings as in your brain is literally giving out on you and you're having a breakdown. So again, if there's only one thing that you're going to take away from this book, what I want it to be is to learn how to complete the cycle.
Yep. And they give very specific suggestions on what works. And that's what I love about Emily in this book is she is very science-minded. Yeah. She's interested in what works. So what is actually going to tell your body it is safe to complete the stress cycle and move on. The number one thing is
physical activity, exercise.
Yep. Let's hear what they have to say about that. Remember, your body has no idea what filing your taxes or resolving an interpersonal conflict through rational problem solving means. It knows, though, what jumping up and down means. Speak its language, and its language is body language. You know how everyone says exercise is good for you? That it helps with stress and improves your health and mood and intelligence, and basically should definitely get some. This is why physical activity is what tells your brain you have successfully survived the threat, and now your body is a safe place to live. This is in italics. Physical activity is the single most effective strategy for completing the stress response cycle. I mean, again, if you take nothing away from this book, you know Rachel and I are not usually the biggest proponents of hardcore exercise.
No one has ever accused me, but they don't say hardcore.
They don't.
Like
moving your body,
counts. Walking. I mean, I don't know how fast. I think like a nice brisk walk works.
Get your heart rate up a little bit.
Yeah. I mean, I don't even know you have to get your heart rate up necessarily, but I don't think like a tiny, I don't think Scarlett's pace of walking would count.
Well, yeah.
That's like existing very slowly on a sidewalk.
You happen to be moving, but barely.
Yeah. I mean, a brisk walk probably counts, riding your bike, doing some yoga, all of that counts.
And to be honest, if anything's going to get me to exercise, it's more likely to be that I'm going to feel better mentally and emotionally than
it's like I'm taking out the trash. It's like it's like I'm doing a chore.
I'm like, all right.
But there's actually a higher purpose to the chore, right? Because I know, it's not just making me healthier. It's actually helping me process the stress of daily life.
Yeah. So it's not the only way. We're going to get into some other ways, but just know that that's the most immediate and most effective way.
Okay. So there's the list of other ways, which I'm not going to get into in detail. I'm just going to list them out for you. Include breathing exercises, of course.
Like deep meditative type breathing.
Obviously meditation could be probably one. Positive social interaction, like having a good time with friends
and laughing.
Laughter is a big one. Affection, be it physical or not, it doesn't necessarily have to be touchy-feely.
They do talk about hugs though, and how prolonged hugs can tell your body we're safe.
Yes, for sure. A big cry. Don't I know that one? And creative expression. All of those make sense, right? Intuitively, you hear those and they make sense.
But if you're doing those things, there's probably not a threat around. Those things mean we're safe. Yeah. If I can be creative, there's not a lion in the room.
Yeah. If you combine those with physical activity, then you're really motoring. Okay. So they talk about signs that you need to deal with the stress, even if it means ignoring the stressor, which I find interesting because I think that's kind of daily life, right? Is that sometimes you can't immediately do something about the stressor. Ideally, you'd be able to like, I don't know, if you had a boss who was constant source of stress, you'd be able to switch departments or like quit your job and not deal with that person. But that's not realistic, right? That you're going to have stressors that don't go away. And so you need to first sometimes deal with the impact that it's having on you so that it doesn't keep building up in your system. Because what they're talking about is a lot of chronic ailments, a lot of and be that physical or mental, come from years of unprocessed incompletions of the cycle. Incomplete cycles would have been a better way to say that, Rachel. But, So I was thinking, oh my God, I went like decades without completing a stress cycle, probably. And I was just piling it on. No wonder I was so anxious and depressed and like riddled with chronic ailments at like a certain point in my 20s.
Well, we heard what stress does to your body. They got really specific on the bodily reaction to stress. And if you're never completing that, of course, that would wreak havoc on your body.
Right. So your brain and body exhibit predictable signs when your stress level is elevated. And these will serve as very reliable clues that indicate you need to deal with the stress before you can be effective in dealing with the stressor. Okay. Number 1 on that list is that you notice yourself doing the same apparently pointless thing over and over again, or engaging in self-destructive behaviors.
Number 2 on the list, chandeliering. This is Brene Brown's term for the sudden, overwhelming burst of pain so intense that you no longer can contain it, and you jump as high as the chandelier. You have a really big reaction to something that ordinarily wouldn't cause that big of a reaction.
Remember how that happened to me recently? And I had an absolute 100 on the scale tantrum meltdown about someone suggesting I take a dance class. Maybe I'll share that story in a few weeks on an upcoming episode. But I chandeliered the shit out of that. And I was actually on a walk while that happened. I was completing the stress cycle while introducing a new one. Okay. All right. Number 3, you turn into a bunny hiding under a hedge. Imagine a rabbit being chased by a fox and she runs under a bush to hide. How long does she stay there? Until the fox is gone, right? Well, but if your brain is stuck in the middle of a cycle, it may lose the ability to recognize that the fox has gone. So you just stay under that bush, as in, you come home from work and watch cat videos while eating ice cream directly from the container, using potato chips as a spoon, or you stay in bed all weekend. So if you are hiding from your life and you are sort of comatose, that is a sign that your stress level has hit an unmanageable level.
Yep. And 4, your body feels out of whack. So you could be sick all the time. You could have chronic pain or injuries that just won't heal, infections that keep coming back. And this makes sense because stress is not just stress. It's a biological event that's really happening in your body that can cause biological problems that they're not always explainable by standard diagnoses.
Okay. Here's the good news. I'm going to quote something else for you. The good news is that stress is not the problem. The problem is that the strategies that deal with stressors have almost no relationship to the strategies that deal with the physiological reactions our bodies have to those stressors. To be well is not to live in a state of perpetual safety and calm, but to move fluidly from a state of adversity, risk, adventure, or excitement back to safety and calm and out again. Stress is not bad for you. Being stuck is bad for you. Wellness happens when your body is a place of safety for you, even when your body is not necessarily in a safe place. You can be well even during the times when you don't feel good. This is so important. I think we think that life will only be right when we're not stressed, but we're designed to experience stress. It's not inherently a problem that we experience it. It's a problem that we experience it in the volume that we do, that we're not able to process it, and that we're not able to get through it and move and complete the cycle.
And then we don't always know how. Well, up until maybe right now, you didn't know how to complete the cycle. And so the way they say that is wellness is not a state of being, it's a state of action.
Which I appreciate, that it's not a matter of sitting still and like being well, that in order to be well, you need to be moving. Literally and figuratively, you need to be moving.
Because you can't just sit and in your own brain tell yourself,
I'm well.
No, you have to do something about it, because your body only responds to that action, to that physiological signal. We're okay.
Okay.
So we're going to kind of move on to the next phase here, and they're going to explain how they progress from the first chapter to the second.
Okay.
Chapter 1 was about dealing with the stress itself. Chapter 2 is about managing the stressors.
Okay.
It's about knowing how to persist when you're past the edge of your capabilities, and it's about knowing when to quit. Specifically, it's about what we call the monitor, the brain mechanism that manages the gap between where we are and where we're going. Exactly what this looks like is different for everyone, but it impacts every domain of life, from parenthood to career success to friendships to body image. And for women, the gap quickly becomes a chasm.
Okay. I had never heard it quite described like this, and I enjoy the discussion of the monitor. Okay. So technically it's called the discrepancy reducing / increasing feedback loop or criterion velocity. But obviously you don't call it those things because that would be really annoying to have to say.
Very nerdy.
So they call it the monitor. The monitor is an internal fixture that we all have that knows what your goal is, how much effort you're investing in that goal, and how much progress you're making. It keeps a running tally of your effort to progress ratio, and it has a strong opinion about what that ratio should be. There are so many ways a plan can go wrong, some of which you can control and some of which you can't, all of which will frustrate your monitor. Example, traffic.
So if you know you have 20 minutes to get somewhere, you're thinking about that as if I have 20 minutes and I'm just going to get through every green light and get to where I'm supposed to go.
Well, you're super happy if that's happening. Like your monitor, not upset. Everything's kosher.
Because that's how long it takes when you're just going and everything runs smoothly. But that's not always how it works.
Your monitor is happy in that instance because you're putting in low effort and you're making a lot of progress. Happy monitor.
Yes. And it has this idea of this is a 20-minute drive. It took me 20 minutes. We are great. Now, sometimes you think this is a 20-minute drive. And so you give yourself 20 minutes. And then there's a bunch of traffic because maybe you forgot it was rush hour, or
there was an accident.
Hit every single red light, or there's an accident or something has slowed it down. And now a 20-minute drive is taking you 40 minutes. That is going to send all kind of alert bells to your monitor. It's like, oh no, we're totally off track here. I had this expectation of what it was supposed to be. We're not there. We're not even close.
Angry monitor.
Stress.
Yes. Very well. I mean, I'm sure you could have another reaction, but I'm pissed.
Yeah. Well, they actually say the first thing that you usually feel is anger.
Yeah.
And then eventually you might feel defeated.
Well, that's kind of the third phase, is that eventually you will shift from rage to despair when your monitor decides that your goal has become unreachable. Like, okay, well, I'm literally not going to miss this meeting. And so now I'm spiraling into despair because what if I get fired because I missed this really important meeting because I got stuck in traffic? And you'll spiral. So this is a traffic example, but how many of us are doing this about the trajectory of our entire lives?
Right. We have an idea. The monitor, I should say, has an idea.
For our career, our romantic relationships, everything.
Where we should be and how long things should take, how accomplished we should be. And the reality doesn't always match up to that cue stress. If reality is not matching up with what the monitor thinks it should be, that becomes its own stressor.
Okay.
So some ways to mitigate.
Controllable stressors.
Which they're not all controllable, but the ones that we do have some control over.
Their idea is called, the way that they're describing it is called planful. I don't actually like this. I think it's kind of a stupid phrase, but whatever. Planful problem solving. Kristen, you're someone who needs to benefit from planful problem solving and has had to come up with all sorts of hacks to mitigate controllable stressors.
Oh yeah. I have systems. I have things that I rely on. Essentially, it's ways that you try to get ahead of the problem by you thinking through what you need. So it could be, okay, how much time am I really going to need? Maybe I have to budget some extra time.
Stop optimistically budgeting your time. You're terrible at that. You're always like, well, this will take me 30 minutes and it's dead on going to take you an hour.
Yes. So I have to be aware of my own overly optimistic monitor and rein it in and be like, how long is this really?
Let's add 30 minutes to everything.
What can we really accomplish in a day? Because it's not as much as you think you can. It might be keeping a solid calendar or list. I live by my Asana board, by my Google Calendar, by the reminders tab or the reminders app in my phone, things that help you keep track of things.
But women know this. So this isn't like they have chapters later in the book about kind of how to deal and how to cope and how to change the way that you think. And they're not literally saying that the solution to stress is to plan better and keep lists. That's not what they're saying. They're saying in the circumstances where a stressor is controllable, it does help to get out ahead of the problem by potentially having some helpful hacks or having someone help you create those hacks, because some of us are not necessarily, I mean, Kristen and I have been doing this for years. I am someone who can get out of ahead of a stressor because I think 10 steps ahead naturally. Now, that's also a source of anxiety for me. I actually think I'm good at thinking ahead because I'm anxious. So like the stress actually just make me better at thinking ahead.
Think too far ahead, and then you don't have enough information. So you're trying to plan ahead with way too little information, which is its own stress. But
I never have to worry about like, will I, remember to do X, Y, Z? Like I know I'm going to do it. You, totally different story. Mm-hmm. So some people do need hacks to help them get to the point where they're mitigating as best they can the controllable stressors. So if you've done that though, if you've gotten to the point where I did this with a client recently where she was really overwhelmed by her dishwashing. It's like the chore she hates the most of all the chores. And she just like couldn't keep up with it. And so I said, okay, guess what? We're going to pair it with something that you're already doing, which is always a hack, right? You pair something you don't want to be doing with something you're already doing so that it just becomes natural. And like, it's like at the end of breakfast or at the end of a walk, you're just going to tack 10 minutes on to dishwashing and you're literally going to set a timer and you're going to walk away. And she said, oh my God, I've been sticking to it because I'm not going in there overwhelmed because I have all of these dishes and I don't know how long it's going to take. I know I only have 10 minutes, so I'm going to do what I can in those 10 minutes, but then I'm keeping up with it every day because I'm doing it, right? So if you get to the point where you've hacked as much as you can and you've gotten out ahead of the problem, then really the next thing is you need to get better at just learning how to deal with uncontrollable stressors, which basically means changing your mindset around them, which the whole rest of this becomes coaching. As I was reading it, I was like, oh, they just mean coaching.
Yep.
They just mean what we do in coaching.
Yeah. So you're reframing problems and seeing them as potential opportunities.
Yeah.
Maybe you're redefining what success means, making it mean something on your terms, or redefining what failure means, so that you're not taking on other people's definitions, but you're redefining it for yourself.
Right. So
these are some of the ways that you can adapt your mind. Obviously, Rachel and I do this every day. We know there's a lot that goes into that. But if you can't control it, then the best you can do is control your response.
How you think about it. So I'm not going to spend a ton of time on that because you guys listen to this podcast. You already understand that. I mean, this is what Kristen and I do every single week, is hopefully we give you a way to think about something you haven't thought of before. And that is a huge way that we can combat burnout, is by, if we can't change something, then we have to change how we think about it. And again, I think this book is actually, I say again, as if I said this before, but we haven't. But I think this book was written for people who are what I would call muggles. Like they haven't really been it's not meant for people who already are coaches or who have been through 6 months of coaching before. I think there are some things in here, especially in the first 3 chapters, that are really helpful for learning how to complete the cycle and understanding stress. But, the
mindset stuff.
But for some people, that's actually the first time they've ever heard that sure. I can change my mindset around something. I can reframe a problem as an opportunity, like the traffic thing. Well, okay, this is an opportunity for me to catch up on this podcast that I never would have gotten to catch up on. I guess I'm just going to relax and zen out to this great story that I'm hearing. Like literally as simple as that. But for some people, they've never heard that before.
Mm-hmm. Right. So that can make you feel more in control in an uncontrollable situation. And sometimes that's the best you got.
And that's sometimes enough to let go of a lot of stress. To not get stressed in the first place, because your mentality is calmer.
This is why Rachel and I have said before, we've had clients who came into coaching convinced they need a new job.
Right.
And sometimes the process of coaching has them so change their thinking and their mindset around their whole life circumstance, including their job, that their perception makes it into a whole new reality without having to change anything. That is possible. That is how powerful that this can be.
Okay, so there's an example of Julie in the book using planful problem solving and what they call positive reappraisal, which is just changing your mindset and seeing things in a more optimistic, reframed kind of light to monetize the diversity and inclusion work that she'd already been doing in her job for free. Because in this example, Julie is a Black woman and people at work are coming to her to ask her, about diversity and inclusion initiatives, and she's not getting paid for it as part of her job. And she's fine with it, but she decides to create a side hustle where she's monetizing that. And listen, this is a great example, but I had to put a bullet point here about it because if Julie is not maybe a fire starter or a side hustler or someone who genuinely likes the idea of monetizing her idea and adding a whole separate business to her life beyond her full-time job, then that's gonna burn her out more.
And you have to make sure that it's the right solution for what you're actually looking for, how you're wired, what you're seeking. Otherwise, you could create more stress trying to solve the problem.
Emily and Amelia have never heard of passion profiles. No. So what I would tell them is one huge source of burnout, ladies, is that people are trying to work in a way that doesn't align with their passion profile. So don't give examples of people, thinking, oh, I'm just this is great. This is a source of stress. I'm just going to charge money for it now. And that'll make me feel better. Well, yeah, maybe if you're a fire starter, that's a brilliant idea. If you're not, that's a source of more stress. Mm-hmm. So anyway, I couldn't let that go.
I do think it's important to, and I'm glad they cover, when do you need to just give up? When is this not tenable?
You need to stop persevering
anymore. And they give you 4 questions to consider when you're on the brink of, do I just need to give this up? What are the benefits of continuing? And what are the benefits of stopping? Mm-hmm. And then on the other side, what are the costs of continuing? What are the costs of stopping? So it's essentially a more robust pro-cons list. What am I really getting out of this? And how much is it really costing me? Mm-hmm. So that's fine. We can do the analytical assessment side of it, but you can also check in with your intuition. And this is why we have so many podcast episodes about how to tap into your intuition, because often there's an answer that you don't even really have to explain. Just something in you is telling you, we're done. This is complete. Or, I know it's hard, but it's worth it. Just go a little bit further. It's going to be worth it. So you might have just a sense that has nothing to do with your pro-cons list. I think doing both is a really good balance. Let's engage our mind, but let's also engage our intuition. Mm-hmm. And that can give you a more personalized answer to that question. Nobody else can help you answer the question nobody else can tell you the answer, I should say.
Of when to give up?
No. When it's time to quit.
No. Okay. The last part or the last sort of section in the first part of this book is about, I'm just going to quote it to you. It's about meaning as a power you carry inside you that helps you resist and recover from burnout. A woman's need for meaning is not fundamentally different from a man's, but the obstacles that stand between women and their sense of meaning are different. Because, so I think that's true. Again, that harkens back to human giver syndrome, where a man is often very much encouraged to go in pursuit of his thing. And you see this so often in, I don't know, you're watching an award show, no one interviewing the celebrities about nothing that matters. What are you wearing? Right? Gucci, Valentino. They never ask the men, how do you juggle being a full-time working actor with having 3 children? No one ever asks the man that. Every single woman gets asked, how do you do it? Because there's this expectation that our pursuit of meaning is coupled with, we have to also be givers. And so they're right that we have different obstacles in terms of pursuing meaning.
Yep.
But basically the point of this chapter is that not knowing the meaning of why you're struggling or why life is sometimes hard or why you're stressed out is its own profound source of suffering.
And that's a human thing. I mean, that's if you don't
that's an existential thing.
Yes. If you don't have a meaning for why you're going through what you're going through, you will become depressed or angry or bitter or all of the above.
Yes.
And obviously also being caught up in a meaningless grind, just kind of going through the motions and like, what is the point of all of this? Why am I working so hard for this? Why is this?
What's the point?
What's the point? That is going to be a huge source of burnout. If you don't have purpose, you don't have meaning, you don't have any sense of why am I doing all of this? You will get to that existential burnout in the same way that you can get to emotional and physical burnout.
Yes. So their response to that is to make meaning, engage with something larger than yourself. And research has found that meaning is most likely to come from 3 kinds of sources. 1, pursuit and achievement of ambitious goals that leave a legacy, as in maybe finding a cure for HIV or making the world a better place for these kids. 2, service to the divine or other spiritual calling, as in attaining spiritual liberation and union with the universe, or glorying God with my words, thoughts, and deeds. And 3, loving, emotionally intimate connection with others, as in raising my kids so they know they're loved no matter what, or loving and supporting my partner with authenticity and kindness.
Okay, by now.
First of all, let me just say, I agree with all of them. I agree.
Absolutely.
If you do not have, I say this to my clients all the time.
I recommend all the above.
If you do not have a connection to anything bigger than yourself, your life will feel like a completely pointless grind and your energy will be exhausted day in and day out and you will be chronically burnt out. There is no doubt that making meaning of your life, the hard times and the good, is incredibly important. And
at this point, you've listened long enough, I'm sure, to know we're going to caution you away from making your career the main purpose of your life or the meaning of your life.
Because they flirt with that a little bit in this book.
Mm-hmm. Where a lot of people do. I think we hear that kind of across the board of find the thing that really lights you up and do that as your career. And that's going to give you that sense of purpose and meaning in your life.
They kind of veer a little bit into that. And not heavily, not to the point where I was like, that's egregious, but to a point where I felt the need to comment on it.
Yes. And when you get clear on your meaning, do you want your work to align with that? Probably. Mostly. Maybe not if you're a thriver. Maybe you're not. Maybe you don't need it to.
But it does. But your career as a thriver needs to support your sense of meaning, even if your work is not where you find your meaning.
Exactly. Yes, exactly. We just don't want that to be the sole source because that's when you over-identify with your work, and that's where it gets dangerous quickly.
Yeah. And that causes more burnout because then you're kind of codependent with your work.
And then you're terrified of what if it goes away and who am I without it? And a whole new vein of existential burnout.
We don't, just to clarify, not that you need it, but we don't think you have to believe in God or the universe or whatever, but having some ability to hand control over to something bigger than you is incredibly powerful and a great source of stress relief. I mean, Tosha Silver is our favorite person who explores that. Outrageous Openness is our favorite spiritual book. And we did a bonus book club about that nigh on 4 years ago now. October, November 2018. So that would be my recommendation for if you want to learn how to let go and just relax into I'm not the master of the universe. Start there.
Mm-hmm. And they'll get into this more when we get into
part two of the book.
But they talk a lot about at the heart of human giver syndrome is misogyny, right?
Obviously.
Meaning that women usually feel guilty about doing anything outside of their normal daily grind.
Right.
And they're constantly feeling this need to be of service to others. Because of course, according to human giver syndrome, your meaning is supposed to be being pretty and happy and calm and generous and attentive to the needs of others.
Right. So
being a people pleaser is your meaning. Taking care of others.
Anything other than that is selfish. Pursuing my own happiness or my own fulfillment is selfish.
I don't think we need to belabor the point that your meaning should not be taking care of other people. I think at this point,
you can want to be of service to other people, But that's not the same thing as my whole point for existing is
the
other
meaning
people.
of my life is to make other people happy.
No.
And to completely ignore my own needs. No, that can't be right.
No, that's not right. But to just have empathy for yourself when you find yourself feeling guilty for wanting to carve out some meaning that might have nothing to do with anyone else. As a woman, you will probably feel that at some point, and that's normal. And it's also not a reason to stop. Mm-hmm. Okay. This has been part 1 of our conversation. We will be back with part 5. Good God.
There's only 2 parts.
There's only 2. Part 2 on Friday. And do come back. I feel so British right now.
I do.
Do come back for part 2 of our very rousing conversation on burnout. But while you wait, keep in mind, if you want to work with us on really anything we just talked about would be ripe opportunity for one-on-one coaching.
If you're like, I have some stressors and I don't know how to control them. I don't know how to control my own stress reaction. And I feel really burnt out.
And I have no sense of meaning. And in fact, I have terrible idea ever reframing anything other than the way I see it.
That would be, first of all, normal. That's most humans. And also, that's what we do. That's what coaching is directly targeted at. Let's first and foremost create that sense of meaning and reframe your own ability to impact and change and direct your life, because your brain's going to tell you that you're stuck, and you're not as stuck as your brain wants you to believe. That I know. That is true about every person I have ever coached. Their brain tells them that they're stuck. They are not as stuck. And we first have to disentangle that and then figure out, well, if I'm not that stuck, where the heck do I want to go?
This book actually, in a roundabout way, does a really good job of explaining why people are so miserable when they're stuck. And then why once they start doing something, like as soon as they sign up for coaching, it doesn't even matter if they've had a session with us yet, they feel better. It's because they're moving again, literally or figuratively. Figuratively in this sense, you started moving again.
Yep.
And that's the point.
Taking back agency.
Wellness is about action.
Yes.
So if you are sitting there not taking action and you are stressed out and you are wondering why you are not clear and not directed, it's because you need more action and you don't know what to do. And that is what coaching is for. It's helping you learn how to take the right action.
We know what to do.
I know what to do.
We have the process. We will guide you through the process. There is a lot of there's a whole step called action in the process. Yeah. And a lot that happens before we even get there.
So, okay, clarityonfire.com/coaching, or you can just, go to the website or the show notes. Just go to the show notes and click on the link there, fill out a form, and we will schedule a chat with you to just make sure it's a good fit. Make sure you've reviewed the page before you fill out the form, just so you know, like, what am I getting myself into? What are my options? What's the difference between 6 months and 3 months? We would talk to you more about in detail what the difference is, but just like even financially, what's the difference?
Yeah. We value transparency. We try to give as much information as we can on that page. We talk about,
I don't want to waste your time or mine.
Yeah. We talk about the steps. We talk about some FAQs. We talk about the coaching options. We list our prices. We list kind of the process. Like the main bare bones of it is on that page, and we can give you a little bit more detail on a conversation, but we want you to have a good sense of, is this right for me? So read through it, see if it resonates. If it does, submit an application and we'll talk to you.
All right. We will see you in a few short days on Friday to talk about the real enemy and then how to win against burnout. Be back then.
See you then.